Good morning and welcome to NBC10 at Issue. I'm NBC10's Lauren Mayk. Today we begin with Decision 2022, the results of Pennsylvania's primary. Today we break down the race for governor. Republican Doug Mastriano will go up against Democrat Josh Shapiro after claiming victory last Tuesday. Mastriano spelled out his plans for the office if he wins.
So on day one, any mandates are gone. Yep. On day one, any jab for job requirements are gone. On day one, school transparency will be ordered. Only biological females can play on biological female teams.
Mastriano will take on Democratic nominee Josh Shapiro. Shapiro ran unopposed. He was isolating from home on election night due to a case of COVID-19 and did not speak in public. However, Shapiro did release a statement in regard to Mastriano's victory, saying in part, quote, Mastriano wants to dictate how Pennsylvanians live their lives. That's not freedom. I will work tirelessly every single day to win this election in November, defend Pennsylvanians' freedoms, and meet this moment. With me now are Democratic political analyst Eleanor Dezzi and Republican political analyst Joe Watkins. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Lauren. Great to be with you.
Well, Eleanor, first for you. Josh Shapiro started running against Doug Mastriano even before Election Day. Did he get what he wanted, and is there a downside in that?
Well, I think that it was quite clear in the last few weeks of the campaign, Lauren, that Mastriano was going to win the nomination. All the polls were showing him up double digits. And then, of course, he got the endorsement of the former president, and that seemed to help him, too. So I don't think it was any surprise. And I think that the one thing about the difference between Josh Shapiro and Mastriano, they are so different that I think it's going to be a very, very unusual but a very interesting campaign.
And, you know, this race, one thing that was surprising to some people was just by how much Mastriano won this. You know, we were talking at one point with a field that big that somebody could have won maybe with 25%. He got much more than that. He got double what his closest competitor did. Joe, did people underestimate Doug Mastriano, and do you think Democrats are underestimating him?
I don't think anybody underestimated him. I think inside the Republican Party, there was, I think, a very strong sense, even early on, that Mastriano had strong support, strong grassroots support among Republicans around the Commonwealth, and Trump Republicans especially. So he's very, very well known in what we call the T, and so it's not surprising to see how strong he was. President Trump waited till the end before he endorsed anybody. So by the time he did endorse Mastriano, he was already way ahead of the polling data. So it wasn't a real surprise to anybody that Mastriano won by the amount that he did. The traditional Republican forces tried to coalesce around Lou Barletta, who's a great candidate, but it was too little too late. And of course, McSwain and some others chose to continue their campaigns. Dave White, who had a very good campaign, chose to keep their campaigns alive. Had they contributed their voters to Barletta, there might have been a closer race, but clearly Mastriano won it hands down.
I'm glad you mentioned Lou Barletta, because I want to ask you about something. The day before the primary, I talked to Lou Barletta, and I asked him about Mastriano. And Joe, I want to ask you about this, but first, take a listen to what he said. Do you share the same policy positions, the same beliefs that Doug Mastriano does?
I think if you watch the forums and the debates that we had many of them. There's very little light between any of the candidates on the policies, maybe some differences on how we would do things. But I don't think there was a lot of light in between our policy issues.
So, Joe, do Republicans, including other Republicans up and down the ballot in the general election, do they stick with that? Do they now embrace what Mastriano has been saying, whether that is about abortion or about the 2020 election, for example?
Well, the way a Republican wins a statewide election in an off-presidential election year is to do well around the state and keep their losses down in southeastern Pennsylvania, which is very heavily Democrat. So that becomes a challenge for Mastriano as well, to first tell voters who he is. Josh Shapiro was very smart to buy ad time, telling people who he thinks Mastriano is. Mastriano really needs to have money to buy ad time to tell voters, especially in the southeastern part of the state, who he is and what he would do if he was elected governor. He hasn't done that yet.
The moderate Republicans, what I like to call the Arlen Specter Republicans, are not very happy about him as their candidate. And they were a little upset. I spoke to some of the Republican consultants that they were very upset that the former President Trump came in and endorsed Mastriano when Lou Barletta was really the first elected official in Pennsylvania that really went all out for Trump in 16 and 20. So there's a lot of fractures going on in the Republican Party right now, Lauren. I think they have some healing to do. And when you looked at Mastriano on election night, the first thing he said was, I am going to do, and he named about 5 different things. He never mentioned bringing the party together. He never mentioned working with the legislature. And you just have to wonder if this is a man who can bring that party together.
Well, let me ask you on the Democratic side as well, how Josh Shapiro handles this, because from the beginning, the Republicans running for this nomination were tying Josh Shapiro to Governor Tom Wolf. And, you know, when I talked to Josh Shapiro when he first started running at the beginning of his campaign, and I asked him about, you know, things that maybe he would have done differently, he didn't really give me anything or say any ways he would have handled, for example, you know, things differently than Tom Wolf. So does Shapiro now try to put any daylight between him and the Wolf administration? How does he handle that?
Well, I think what he will do is talk about what he plans to do in the future. I mean, he may have different strategies on bringing us out of the pandemic. Financially, the state's in good shape. And I think that Josh will dovetail on that and say, you know, Tom Wolf did a decent job, but this is what we can do better.
What happens this summer when the Supreme Court decision about Roe versus Wade actually comes out? We've seen that leaked draft. What happens, Joe, when that decision actually comes out?
Well, clearly that'll energize voters on both sides of that divide. Clearly pro-life voters will be happy if a decision like that comes out, and pro-choice voters will not be. And that'll make that an issue heading into the fall campaign, which will certainly make it harder for the Republican gubernatorial candidate to win over pro-choice voters and suburban women in the southeastern part of the state. Will be an important coalition for him to win, to be competitive in this race. So I see that happening if that decision takes place.
And I think the decision will come down sometime in the summer, and I think it's going to be a monumental part of the campaign on both sides, and they have very differing opinions. But I must say that there are so many bread and butter issues right now: the price of gas, the lack of formula for babies, jobs coming out of the pandemic. I think the decision will be huge. I don't doubt that. But there are people struggling in their homes, too. And I think that they will be voting on those issues.
How much of a factor, since he weighed in, do you think President Trump will be in this race, Joe?
Well, it depends. I think President Trump will weigh in based upon the competitiveness of the race. So you're not likely to see him get involved if it looked like a runaway.
There's one other issue that's pending that involves not only Trump, but Mastriano, and that is the committee that's looking into the January 6th insurrection. Remember, Mastriano was there, got buses, was organized, and is definitely on the radar of the committee, which I think is very, very important.
We're going to have to leave it there. We have had a good conversation today about the governor's race. Next time, we will tackle the race for the U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania.
Sounds good.
Democratic political analyst Eleanor Dezzi and Republican analyst Joe Watkins. Thanks so much.
Thanks for
so
having
much.
us.